So I believe reform is a good thing.
And that voice is growing. It's louder and louder.
Two top cops with a combined half-century of experience.
It wasn't created overnight. It's not going to get fixed overnight.
Saying candidly,
we all have biases. Every human being in this world have biases.
Police officers and attitudes about them are changing.
That voice to me is saying we want to be treated with dignity and respect.
Chief Luther Reynolds leading the City of Charleston Police Department since 2018.
We want a professional police organization in our city that respects everybody.
I asked the police about the 2019 racial bias audit that examined police policies and procedures. The report criticized the department for use of force, community engagement, and racial disparities during traffic stops. The chief put systemic racism and discrimination at the core of the findings.
And when you look at the people that are experiencing disproportionate impacts on education, lack of male role models and mentoring, housing, employment, disparate impacts on flooding, disparate impacts on violence, and it goes on and on. Largely, the African American community is on the lower end of that. I've been on recruiting calls recently where they've asked me, do Black Lives Matter in the city of Charleston? Is that important to your organization? And I said, yeah, it's very important. And in fact, if there's somebody on this call who doesn't think it's important, you can't be a police officer here. You're not welcome here.
And he says the riots that happened in downtown Charleston 9 months ago damaged the city and relationships between the public and public servants.
There was a lot of criticism about the protest and then the riots in downtown Charleston and how the police department responded.
I'm not going to be defensive and say, hey, we did everything right, because we didn't. Federal, state, and local, who we work very closely with and work very closely with then, who didn't see this coming, who didn't predict this, who didn't have that intelligence, that it was somewhat spontaneous.
Dozens of fires, busted windows and doors, torched and vandalized police cruisers. The damage, more than $2.2 million. Chief Reynolds says as businesses rebuild, his department will rebuild trust.
Does your department reflect the community it serves?
As we get better data analytics, we'll have a much better conversation. It was a very high priority to get diversity in our recruiting. African American, men, women, different languages. We have Latinos that we've hired with Spanish-speaking capabilities. We have a good representation with the LGBTQ community, and being able to attract other people to our organization that I think represent our communities and mirror those people that we serve.
Chief Reynolds says problems that plague society, racial profiling, over-policing, underserved neighborhoods, will not be tolerated on his police force.
We're not just randomly arresting people and writing tickets, but we're focusing where the problems are, and that's the outcome.
And he adds, no-knock warrants, strangle and chokeholds are not allowed in his department.
And we have the right strategies, and we're focusing on the right problems, and we're doing it as professionals. We're treating people with dignity and respect.
About 10 miles away, Chief Reggie Burgess is chief in a community where he grew up, North Charleston. He says growing up on Liberty Hill and Union Heights makes him a different kind of law enforcer.
The people that come outside the receptionist area that want to complain on police about what police do, they look like me, Carolyn. They're black. So I know that if we can find a way to improve our quality of service to all communities, but also make sure that I give my officers, who happen to be, we have a majority white population in my force, give them the tools that they need to be able to navigate around any situation in any community that they're serving.
I asked Chief Burgess if all demographics of North Charleston are represented on his police force.
Chief, does your current police force look like the population of people it serves in terms of diversity?
No, it doesn't, but we've been working hard since I became chief, and we've changed that totally.
We talked about the deadly 2015 shooting of a black man who was unarmed, Walter Scott, by then North Charleston police officer Michael Slager, who is white. Scott was running away from the officer when he was shot. The incident recorded on a cell phone. Slager is serving a 20-year prison sentence.
About Michael Slager. Michael Slager made a decision that Michael Slager made. I'm African American. My assistant chief is Caucasian. he nor I have ever shot anybody running from us. We're the only profession in this nation that one individual somewhere else could cause problems for all of us.
A very sharper camera lens on the police department.
Well, I agree with that, but I think it's also internal as well.
Chief Burgess says they have closely examined their use of force. Some best practices have always been a part of their procedures.
But there's no strangleholds and no chokeholds in my policy.
Neither no knock warrant.
And no knock. We do knock and announce.
Let's talk about the racial bias audit.
Whatever they find that we are not doing well, they'll be here to help us to implement better practices.
They say they are both more committed than ever to their department following law and order and public service.